The CEO was in the middle of a meeting when he suddenly went pale. Everyone thought he was just tired. But one woman, the cleaner, froze, her eyes locked on him. She knew exactly what was happening, and if she hadn't acted in the next 30 seconds, he'd be dead. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The boardroom was buzzing with energy. The air smelled of fresh coffee and expensive cologne as the company's top executives sat around a long glass table. Sleek laptops open and pens poised to jot down the next big idea. At the head of the table sat Richard Hale, the millionaire CEO, a man known for his sharp mind, bold decisions, and relentless work ethic. This was no ordinary meeting. It was the day Richard would present a high-stakes merger deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. A move that could transform the company's future and cement his legacy. Cameras were ready, reporters had been tipped off, and every department head in the room was prepared to witness history. Richard's voice carried with its usual commanding tone, outlining market strategies, financial projections, and innovative synergies. He spoke with confidence, clicking through slides filled with colorful graphs and bullet points that had taken months to prepare. Every eye was locked on him, or almost every eye in the far corner. Maria quietly pushed her cleaning cart, dusting a shelf and replacing a half-empty water bottle. Maria wasn't part of the corporate world in the traditional sense. She had been the building's cleaning lady for more than 15 years. Always there before dawn, always the last to leave. She moved silently, blending into the background like the furniture, often ignored by the people in suits. But Maria noticed things. She always had. That day, as Richard gestured toward a slide, something made her pause. His speech, normally crisp and precise, had begun to slur ever so slightly, almost unnoticeably. His left hand, the one he was using to emphasize his points, moved stiffly, fingers curling in a way that didn't look intentional. Around the table, executives leaned forward, taking notes, completely absorbed in the numbers on the screen. A few glanced at their phones. Nobody else seemed to notice. Maria's heart tightened. She had seen something like this before, years ago, when her neighbor collapsed in his driveway. It started with the same subtle signs, slurred words, a stiff arm, and a face that didn't look quite right. She remembered the panic, the ambulance, the urgency. She also remembered the doctor's words. If you had waited even a few minutes longer, he wouldn't have made it. Richard kept talking, but now his breathing seemed heavier. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple despite the cool air conditioning. Maria gripped the handle of her cart, torn between staying invisible, as always, and stepping into a world that was not hers. After all, who would listen to a cleaning lady in the middle of a multi-million-dollar presentation? Her decision came when Richard tried to reach for his glass of water and missed. His fingers knocked it over, spilling water across his papers. The room froze for half a second, a few gasps escaping, but most people brushed it off as clumsiness. Maria didn't. She abandoned her cart and strode to the head of the table. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice firm but calm, "you need to sit down." Now, the executives looked at her as if she had spoken another language. Richard blinked in confusion, trying to wave her off. "You're having a stroke," Maria said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "We need to call an ambulance." The room erupted in murmurs. Someone started to protest. "She's overreacting. He's fine." But Maria was already pulling her phone from her pocket. She dialed emergency services with one hand while supporting Richard with the other. Within minutes, paramedics burst through the door. They confirmed what Maria suspected. Richard was experiencing a stroke. The quick call had bought him precious minutes that could mean the difference between life and death. They rushed him to the hospital, leaving behind a stunned boardroom and a very shaken group of executives. For the rest of the day, Maria quietly went back to her duties, wiping tables and emptying trash cans, while whispers followed her from room to room. Some executives avoided eye contact, embarrassed they hadn't noticed anything. Others gave her small nods of respect. 2 days later, news came from the hospital. Richard was stable. The doctors said Maria's quick thinking had prevented severe brain damage. If she had waited even 5 more minutes, the outcome could have been tragic. When Richard returned weeks later, looking healthier but still recovering, his first stop wasn't his office. He walked straight to the janitor's closet. Maria looked up from mopping, startled to see the CEO standing there with a bouquet of flowers and an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter of gratitude. And something more, a scholarship fund in her name for medical training, should she ever wish to pursue it. "I built this company on talent," Richard told her, "but talent means nothing without heart. You saved my life, Maria. That's worth more than any deal I'll ever make." In that moment, Maria realized something. Even in a world obsessed with numbers, power, and prestige, sometimes the smallest voice in the room can make the biggest difference. Maria had seen this before, years ago, in a moment that had burned itself into her memory. Her father had been laughing with her at the kitchen table one evening when, without warning, his face went pale. His grip on his coffee cup weakened, and the left corner of his mouth began to droop. She'd been a teenager then, unsure of what was happening, but she had called for her mother. That quick decision had saved him. The memory flashed now, sharp and urgent, as she stood in the boardroom's corner. The scene before her was painfully familiar. The same pallor in the skin, the same slightly vacant eyes, the same awkward stiffness in the hand. These weren't signs of tiredness, no matter how much the executives might believe that. These were signs of a stroke. Her heart began to pound in her chest. Around the table, the company's best and brightest kept nodding along, pens, scribbling notes, some tapping on their laptops. Not one of them seemed to notice the shift in Richard's voice or the way his gestures had changed. They were focused on the numbers, the slides, the promise of a multi-million-dollar merger. Richard, for his part, was doing his best to push through. He sipped water, glanced at his notes, and tried to keep speaking, but Maria could see it. His words were losing their rhythm. His sentences were shorter now, his eyes struggling to find focus. She stood frozen, her hand on the handle of her cleaning cart. She wasn't part of this world of glass tables, polished leather chairs, and designer suits. She was the cleaner, the one who came in early, stayed late, and made sure the coffee rings disappeared before the next morning's meetings. These people had titles: Chief Financial Officer, Senior Vice President, Director of Marketing. She had none. Would they even listen to her? Her mind raced through the possibilities. If she interrupted, she could be embarrassed, maybe even lose her job. But if she stayed silent, the thought made her stomach turn. She remembered her father's face that night, the terror in his eyes before the ambulance came. She knew what would happen if she waited too long. One glance at Richard sealed her decision. His jaw looked tight, almost slack on one side. His left hand lay useless on the table, fingers curled slightly. No, she couldn't stand here and do nothing. Maria stepped forward, her footsteps breaking the quiet hum of the presentation. The executives looked up, eyebrows raised at the intrusion. She walked directly to Richard's side, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I think I need to sit down right now." He blinked at her, confused, trying to wave her off. "Maria, I'm fine," he said, his words slightly slurred. She shook her head. "No, sir. You're not fine. You're having a stroke." The room went dead silent. A few people glanced at each other, disbelief written on their faces. One man muttered, "That's ridiculous," but Maria ignored him. She'd seen this too many times to doubt herself now. She gently took Richard's arm. "We need to call an ambulance. Right now." Her conviction must have broken through the skepticism, because one of the younger executives grabbed his phone and dialed emergency services. The rest of the room sat frozen as Maria eased Richard into a chair, keeping her eyes on him, speaking softly to keep him conscious. Within minutes, the sound of rushing footsteps echoed in the hallway. 2 paramedics arrived, medical bags in hand. They quickly examined Richard, confirming what Maria already knew. It was indeed a stroke, and every second counted. They lifted him onto a stretcher, wheeling him out as Maria stood back, her hands trembling. The entire boardroom remained in stunned silence until the door closed behind them. For the rest of the day, Maria returned to her work quietly, though the air around her had changed. People who normally didn't even glance her way now stared as she passed, some with respect, others with shame for not noticing what she had. 2 days later, news arrived from the hospital. Richard was stable. The doctors made it clear, if Maria hadn't acted when she did, the damage could have been catastrophic. When Richard returned a few weeks later, still recovering but on his feet, his first stop wasn't the executive suite. He walked straight to the janitor's closet, carrying a bouquet of flowers and an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter of gratitude and a scholarship fund in Maria's name for medical training. "You saved my life," Richard said, his voice steady but warm. "That's worth more than any deal I'll ever make." Maria smiled faintly. She hadn't done it for thanks, money, or recognition. She had done it because sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest, and because no matter who you are, a life is always worth saving. Maria's pulse was pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. She didn't think, she just moved. The cleaning rag slipped from her fingers, hitting the carpet with a soft thud as she rushed toward the head of the table. "Mr. Hale, you need to sit down." "Now," she said, her voice cutting through the steady rhythm of the CEO's presentation. The room froze. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. A few executives looked annoyed, others confused, their brows furrowing at the sight of the company's longtime cleaning lady interrupting a multi-million-dollar merger meeting. One man at the far end of the table frowned. "Maria, please, we're in the middle of—" "No." Maria's voice rose sharply, her tone leaving no room for debate. "He's having a stroke. Someone call 911 now." The words hit the room like a spark to dry tinder. The polished calm of the boardroom shattered in an instant. Several people leapt to their feet, their chairs scraping against the floor. One executive fumbled for his phone, dropping it before grabbing it again. Another muttered, "She's overreacting." But even he couldn't ignore the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Maria didn't care about their doubts. She was already at Richard's side, slipping an arm under his to guide him away from the glass podium. His face was paler now, and when she asked him to squeeze her hand, his left grip was almost non-existent. "It's okay, sir. Just sit here," she said, guiding him into a chair. She tilted his head slightly to keep his airway clear, remembering exactly what the paramedics had done for her father all those years ago. Her voice was calm, steady, the kind of tone that could cut through panic. She grabbed the nearest phone and dialed 911 herself. "This is Maria Torres," she said, her words quick but precise. "I'm at Hale and Sutton's corporate headquarters, boardroom level. Male, late 50s, possible stroke. Slurred speech. Weakness on the left side. It's happening now." The dispatcher's voice was calm but urgent. "Stay with him. Keep him still. Help is on the way." Maria hung up and turned her attention fully to Richard. "Stay with me, Mr. Hale," she said. "Don't try to talk too much. Just breathe." His eyes met hers for a moment, a flicker of confusion, and something else. Gratitude? Fear? It didn't matter. She wasn't letting go until the professionals took over. Around her, the executives had finally snapped out of their stunned silence. Someone cleared the table to make space for the paramedics. Another ran to meet them at the elevator. A woman from HR knelt on Richard's other side, following Maria's lead in keeping him calm. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The polished glass table, the expensive suits, the carefully arranged charts. All of it seemed meaningless now compared to the life hanging in the balance. Then, faint at first but growing louder, came the sound of hurried footsteps and the rustle of medical gear. Two paramedics burst into the room, wheeling a stretcher between them. "What happened?" one asked. Maria didn't hesitate. Sudden slurred speech, left side weakness, pale skin. "Started about 3 minutes ago." The paramedics exchanged a quick glance. She had given them exactly what they needed. They moved fast, taking Richard's vitals, securing an oxygen mask, and preparing to transport him. "You did the right thing calling immediately," one of them told her as they lifted Richard onto the stretcher. "With a stroke, minutes make all the difference." Maria stepped back, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline was wearing off. She watched as they wheeled Richard out, his eyes half closed but still flickering with awareness. The moment the door swung shut behind them, the boardroom seemed to exhale all at once. One of the younger executives looked at Maria with wide eyes. How did you know?" She hesitated, her voice soft. "My father. It happened to him once. I learned the signs the hard way." For the rest of the day, Maria kept to her routine, emptying trash cans and wiping down counters. But the whispers followed her everywhere, in the break room, the hallways, even the elevators. Some were full of awe. Others carried guilt. All of them knew one thing. She had seen what none of them had, and she had acted without hesitation. 2 days later, the news came. Richard was stable, recovering in the hospital. The doctor said the quick response had spared him from severe brain damage, maybe even saved his life. When Richard returned weeks later, still walking carefully but smiling, his first destination wasn't his office. It was the janitor's closet. Maria looked up from mopping to find him standing there, holding a bouquet of fresh lilies and an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter of gratitude and a scholarship fund in her name for medical training. "You didn't just save my life," Richard said. "You reminded me that every single person in this building matters." Maria smiled, humbled but proud. She had only done what she knew was right. But in that moment, she realized sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who makes the most noise when it counts. The wail of sirens was faint at first, but in the boardroom, where the air seemed thick with panic, it was the most welcome sound anyone had ever heard. Every second stretched unbearably, as if time itself had slowed down just to test their nerves. Maria stayed beside Richard, her hand on his shoulder, speaking to him softly. "You're going to be okay, sir. Just keep breathing with me. Help is almost here." Across the table, executives stood in small, uneasy clusters, whispering to one another. The same people who had been so absorbed in the presentation minutes ago now avoided each other's eyes. The only sound were the faint hum of the air conditioning and the ticking of the clock on the wall, each tick reminding them that those seconds mattered more than they had ever imagined. Finally, the door burst open, and 2 paramedics strode in, moving with practiced urgency. Their medical bags clinked as they set them down beside Richard. "What happened?" one asked briskly. Maria didn't miss a beat. Sudden slurred speech, weakness on the left side, started less than 10 minutes ago. "He's still conscious, but struggling." The paramedic gave her a brief, approving nod before kneeling beside Richard to take his vitals. His partner set up an oxygen mask and checked his blood pressure. "It's a stroke," one confirmed after a quick assessment. "Good call. You caught it early." Those words seemed to hang in the air. Maria's chest loosened just slightly, relief flooding her. She had been right, but more importantly, she had been in time. The paramedics worked quickly, attaching monitors and preparing to transfer Richard onto the stretcher. As they lifted him, he opened his eyes, heavy with fatigue. His gaze searched for her, and when it found her, there was a flicker of something more than gratitude, respect. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice faint but sincere. Maria squeezed his hand gently. "Just focus on getting better," she said. Within moments, they were wheeling him out of the room. The sound of the stretcher's wheels against the floor echoed down the hallway, followed by the swift footsteps of the paramedics. Then the doors swung shut, and the room fell into silence. It wasn't the comfortable, confident silence of a meeting adjourned. It was a heavy, unsettled one. The executives looked at each other, each realizing the same truth. They had almost lost their leader right in front of them, and not one of them had recognized the danger. All except Maria. She stood quietly by the wall, picking up the rag she had dropped earlier. Her hands were still trembling, but she tried to steady them. For years, she had moved unseen through this building, tending to the details no one noticed unless they were done wrong. Today, the one detail that mattered most was one she couldn't ignore, and it had made all the difference. One of the younger executives, still pale, stepped toward her. "Maria, how did you know?" She hesitated, her eyes distant. "My father. It happened to him when I was a teenager. I learned the signs the hard way." No one said anything after that. People began to drift back to their seats, but the meeting didn't resume. No one had the heart for it anymore. Over the next 2 days, word spread through the building. Maria, the quiet, diligent cleaner, had saved the CEO's life. The story rippled through every department, passed in whispers by people who had never spoken to her before. Some of them stopped her in the hall just to say thank you. Others could only look at her with a mix of guilt and admiration. Then the update came from the hospital. Richard was stable and expected to make a full recovery. The doctors said that without immediate action, the damage could have been devastating. Her decision to step forward had spared him from the worst. 3 weeks later, when Richard returned to the office, he looked different, a little thinner, moving more slowly, but with a spark in his eyes. Instead of heading straight for the executive suite, he walked down the hall to the janitor's closest. Maria was inside, refilling a mop bucket. She turned, startled, when she saw him standing there. In his hands were a bouquet of fresh lilies and an envelope. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter of thanks and a certificate establishing a scholarship fund in her name should she ever want to pursue medical training. "I've built this company on talent," Richard said, his voice warm, "but talent is nothing without heart. You saw what no one else did, and you acted without hesitation. That's worth more than any deal I'll ever sign." Maria smiled, her eyes misting just a little. She had never thought of herself as a hero. She was just a woman doing her job, and doing what was right when it mattered most. But in that moment, in the heart of the company she had quietly served for years, everyone knew. Maria wasn't just part of the background anymore. She was the reason their leader was still standing. Richard made a full recovery. It hadn't been easy. Weeks of physical therapy, speech exercises, and careful monitoring had tested his patience in ways business negotiations never had. But slowly, steadily, his strength returned. The man who once thrived on 16-hour workdays had been forced to slow down, to think, to appreciate the time he'd been given. And through it all, one thought kept returning to him. If not for Maria, he might not be here at all. When the day finally came for him to return to the office, there was a quiet excitement in the air. The executives had rearranged their schedules. The boardroom had been polished until the glass table gleamed, and employees lined the hallway hoping to catch a glimpse of their CEO. But Richard didn't walk toward the executive suite. Instead, he took a different path, down a quiet side corridor where the scent of cleaning supplies lingered and the floor tiles shone from a fresh mop. He stopped in front of a modest door with a small metal sign, "Janitor's Room." He knocked gently. Maria opened the door, surprised to see him standing there in a crisp suit, looking healthier than she'd last seen him. "Mr. Hale," she said, startled. "You're back." "I am," Richard replied, a smile tugging at his lips. "And I wanted my first stop to be here." He handed her a bouquet of lilies and white roses, their fragrance filling the small space. Then he passed her an envelope, sealed with the company's embossed crest. Maria took it, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter of thanks, not typed, not signed by an assistant, but written in Richard's own careful script. In it, he described that morning in the boardroom, the fear he'd felt, and the gratitude that had only grown stronger in the weeks since. Beneath the letter was something even more unexpected: official paperwork for a scholarship fund, established in Maria's name, dedicated to medical training for any employee, including her, who wished to pursue it. Her eyes widened. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Richard told her. "I've built this company on talent, and you've proven that talent doesn't come with a job title. You saw what no one else did, and you saved my life." Maria felt her throat tighten. She had been cleaning these halls for years, often invisible to the people who passed her. She'd never imagined she would be the reason the CEO was still standing. From that day on, Maria was no longer just a cleaning lady. In the halls, she was greeted with nods, smiles, and genuine respect. People sought her out, not just to thank her, but to ask about her story, to learn what she had seen that day. In meetings, leaders referenced her courage as a reminder that listening isn't just for the boardroom. And Richard made sure her impact went beyond that one morning. Within weeks, he ordered a company-wide initiative. Every single employee, from senior executives to part-time staff, would learn the fast method for spotting a stroke. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty, time to call 911. Posters went up in break rooms, training sessions were held, and the message was clear. No one should ever be too busy, too distracted, or too proud to notice when a life is on the line. For Richard, the lesson was personal. He began spending more time on the office floor, stopping to talk with employees in every department. He knew the value of a sharp mind and a strong business strategy. But now he also knew the worth of compassion, attentiveness, and the courage to speak up, even when you're not the one in charge. As for Maria, she kept working the same job she had always done, but something had shifted. She walked the halls with her head held higher, not out of pride, but because she knew her voice mattered. And when younger employees asked her about that day, she always gave the same answer. I didn't do anything special. I just saw something was wrong and spoke up. Anyone could have done it, but in that moment, I was the one who had to. Months later, at the company's annual meeting, Richard surprised the crowd by calling Maria to the stage. She stood under the bright lights as he told her story, ending with the words, "This company is not just built on numbers and deals. It's built on people, all of them." And this woman reminded us what that truly means. The applause that followed wasn't polite or obligatory. It was thunderous. Maria smiled shyly, still uncomfortable with the attention, but in her heart she knew one thing. She had changed the company forever. Not with a promotion or a contract, but with the simple, unshakable belief that every life is worth protecting. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she could still hear her father's voice from years ago, telling her, "Always pay attention, Mija. You never know when you might save someone's life." She had listened, and it had made all the difference. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring real-life moments. And remember, kindness and courage can change the world, one act at a time. See you in the next video.